support.
Yeah, we should.
John. Hello, everyone, and welcome on this very rainy day or evening to our hybrid lecture and Zoom webinar. My name is Professor Anne Karagosian, and it is my privilege as the director of UCLA's Promise Armenian Institute to welcome you to a lecture entitled Women's Daily Life in Exile, 1915 to 1918, delivered by Dr. Anna Aleksanyan, who is finishing up her postdoctoral fellowship here at UCLA in our Armenian Genocide Research Program within the Promise Armenian Institute. This lecture is part of our Institute's opportunities for our PAI-supported postdoctoral fellows to provide lectures to the community so that we can learn more about their scholarly endeavors. Dr. Aleksanyan is also part of our programming this week during UCLA's International Education Week. So we are especially happy and honored to make this available to you and to have Anna present to us today, this evening. So Dr. Aleksanyan's lecture will focus on the varying experiences of Armenian women during the period of the Armenian Genocide, where after being deported from their homes and arriving at transit camps, they went to various locations within the empire's Arab-speaking provinces. We are grateful to Dr. Aleksanyan for her meticulous research on this very difficult subject and for speaking to us this evening. I am pleased also to be joined in our program by our eminent scholar, Dr. Taner Akcam, who is the director of our Armenian Genocide Research Program in the Promise Armenian Institute, and who is also Anna's mentor. He will be providing commentary on her presentation after her lecture. I am also pleased to note that we have co-sponsorship for this event by the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the UCLA Barbara Streisand Center for the Study of Women, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, or NASR, and the Ararat Eskidjan Museum. We are grateful for the support of all of our co-sponsors. And on behalf of our UCLA co-sponsors, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the indigenous Gabrielino Tongva peoples. It is a privilege for our institution to acknowledge the history of the land on which we are established. Before we move on, let me just mention a few procedural items. First, let me note that this event is being recorded for future viewing on our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute YouTube channel and should be visible, in fact, now on YouTube. And second, for those of you in our audience, when the lecture is finished and Professor Taner Akcam has provided some commentary, feel free to ask questions and Anna will respond to as many as we have time for here. In addition, those of you who are connecting via the Zoom webinar platform, if you have questions to offer remotely, please click on the Q&A button and type in your question. In all cases, please try to be succinct if possible. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Anna Aleksanyan, who earned her PhD at the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies in the History Department at Clark University. Her work explores gendered aspects of the Armenian Genocide in the experiences of its victimized females during 1914 to 1916 and 1918 in particular. Before starting her PhD, for 7 years, she worked at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan, Armenia, as a researcher. Dr. Aleksanyan received her BA and MA in history at Yerevan State University, and from the fall of 2019 until the fall of 2022, she taught as an adjunct lecturer at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. And as I mentioned, Dr. Aleksanyan is completing her postdoctoral fellowship here at UCLA as part of our Armenian Genocide Research Program. So without further ado, Anna, I will now turn this event over to you.
Vanished. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Karapetyan, for your introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. Today, I'm going to speak about women's daily life in exile, which is the second part of my work, because my work concentrates on the entire process of genocide. So as you may know, Armenian genocide has been divided into two main stages. First stage, first stage includes the deportation and the process of deportation and Armenians reaching concentration camps. And the second stage of the Armenian genocide is when these Armenians who reached concentration camps, they were deported again, and they were killed. They were liquidated, so they were killed, eliminated. So first stage of the Armenian genocide, just to give you an idea about women experiences, I would briefly explain what happened. Armenians, when they received an order of deportation, most of Armenians didn't have their men in their households. They were already either sent to army and killed, or they were separated and killed, and Armenian women and children, and mostly elderly, had to go through the deportation routes alone without any male protection, mostly. Why I mention mostly? Because those who study Armenian genocide deeply knows that every province had its own experience, and there were provinces, for example, Trabzon, and I have presented about this and wrote about this. Deportees didn't even make to concentration camps. Only few of them could reach concentration camps. So from province to province, it changed. But overall, Armenian women and children and elderly were alone in those roads. So, and they were subjected to starvation, they were subjected to massacres, forced marriages, sexual violence was part of their journey, of course. And but my presentation today is about this map that you see. Armenian women and children who reach these places. This is a very known map, which was first presented by Armenian national delegation, actually, and it was developed after by Armenian genocide scholars. So I would mostly speak about the places where Armenian deportees crossing Taurus mountainous, they came and they were they were actually settled in some settlements, and they were camps and concentration camps. They were in this map, you can see all of them, like transit camps, concentration camps, and also settlements. So based on this map and the experiences of Armenian women, and I want to tell you that I will come back to this map. And this is the situation, I mean, basically how Armenian women arrived to these concentration camps or transit camps. They were exhausted from the road. They were already robbed. They were raped. They were humiliated. They were starving. So all of these experiences on the road. And they were arriving to these places, even transit camps, with the hope that they will stay at least for a month to rest. So this was very important for them. After being on these roads for several months without a rest, without any means, they were hoping, even though it was very unknown area for most of them, they didn't understand the language, the landscape was it changed for them. They were hoping that they can settle at least for a month to rest. So this is very crucial to understand. So, and then from here, we see that, the Ottoman government, actually, perpetrators designed this and made them believe, the deportees, that they're gonna rest. This is the places to rest. And they were naive, even though going through those deportation roads, being robbed and seeing what was really happening, they hoped that this is the final destination for them, every transit camp. And for those who actually had some money to save, they were hoping that they can bribe locals to stay in those places. So this is very important. And according to the testimonies of survivors and to my studies, I categorize exiled women into 3 groups based on their experiences. So first group is those who settled in the eastern regions. So, and going back to the map again, the eastern regions you can see in this map, and it is important. And then the second group, those who were settled in the northern regions, and they were the luckiest ones. And I will explain why. And people would envy those who were in the northern part. And there were also the third group of women who, I mean, you cannot locate them, all of them in this map, because they were all in the empire, but they were those women who would escape convoys of deportees. Then they would capture by police, and then they would again be deported or resettled among the Muslim population to be served as slaves. So they became slaves. So this is the third group of women experiences that I'm going to tell. So women in the transit camps and their experiences pretty much were the same. And I chose this quote from a survivor who was from an eyewitness who traveled to Islahiye. And if you read survivors' testimonies, many actually went through this transit camp. Okay, and this transit camp was not far from Suruc, which was the same type of transit camp. And survivors usually would arrive, and the government would provide them with tents, okay, to cover, to make make a small, let's say, camp city. But the thing is that these transit camps became the death valleys for Armenian survivors. Why? Because of the conditions of those camps. So there were no any means of for them to clean, to even to get clean water. So they had only they had to stay together, and they couldn't leave this place. So this was basically the place that disease were spread very quickly. And even there were some hospitals here to save or to help Armenian deportees. But these hospitals actually were very well known places where people would go to die. And when I was reading about it, it reminded me Holocaust and in concentration camps during the Holocaust, they had also hospitals. People knew they are going to die in those hospitals. So they did everything to not end up in the hospital, in order to not die. But how? If you have a child and you are ill and you do not have a male protector. So one thing that was important is these women, throughout their way during the deportation, they learned to make a decision, to take an action in order to survive. But at the same time, in these Arab provinces that they ended up, it was very patriarchal, the society, and locals would not deal with women. So women who were alone had to find a community member, a male community member, who would negotiate on behalf of them. So this was complicating the things. And but Armenian communities were very well organized. They were, even though they were separated, they were put in different convoys, deportation convoys, but they could find their people from their villages, from their communities, and reorganize, help each other, which will change because local authorities and, of course, perpetrators were very closely monitoring what was going on inside of the Armenian communities. So they would separate community members, and then they would separate family members as well. Because, as I said, if you have a family member, at least one decent family member, your chances of survival was higher, because if you have a disease, that family member could take care of you, could fetch for water, could negotiate, and could take care of you. So basically, this is why many Armenian women died in those places, many Armenian women. So, and I just want to read this quote from an eyewitness who came to Islahiye. And of course, there were missionaries who were trying to bring, in the beginning, they were trying to bring some aid to those deportees. And in late 1915, it was not allowed, but in the beginning, it was somehow allowed. So, so this is one of the eyewitnesses who would write, and I'm quoting, "A small woman was sitting by the roadside, a bed on her back, a young baby bound at the top of it. In her arms, she had a child of 2 years with eyes grown dim. At the last gasp, the woman had broken down in the distress and wept heartbreakingly. At the entrance to the camp, a heap of dead bodies lay unburied. Right close by the stands of those people who were down with bad dysentery, and this was the illness that almost every deportee had, those who were reaching these places. The field in and around these tents was something indescribable. On one single day, the burial commission buried as many as 580 people. But they buried some of the concentration camps or transit camps. They had people they would hire from Armenian deportees to do the job, to collect the dead. But they were also camps, transit camps like Suruj, who would not even bury the dead. And it was as survivors would describe them. There is this book by Garabet Gabigan, who give details about the Suruj and this transit camp and survivors. And he writes that it was a job of dogs to do the rest. So it wasn't even possibility for some transit camps. So after being in this situation for several weeks, Armenian women realized that they have to escape these transit camps. And of course, not far from these transit camps, there was a city, Aleppo, and there was an Armenian community, of course, in Aleppo. And Armenian community in Aleppo could provide some help to those refugees, and some have relatives and connections in this city. So some Armenian women who could read and write and who could negotiate, they were able to escape these transit camps. And from Islahiye, for example, a woman from Kayseri not only organized her escape to Aleppo, but also organized other 40 Armenian women to escape to Aleppo. And how she did that? Just negotiating and bribing locals who would live there, and hiding in the mountain, and then being able to get tickets to Aleppo. So getting tickets to Aleppo is something that come across when we read memoirs of survivors. It was crucial to get that ticket, and also it was crucial to have the permission to travel. So from a very beginning, Armenian women could do that, but then they lost this opportunity. So many who study Armenian, or who read about Armenian genocide in general, Raqqa is referred as a unique case. And I gave this title because, yes, Raqqa was unique. It wasn't a concentration camp, after all. It was a city where first Armenian deportees came, they could settle, and they had an opportunity to rebuild somehow their lives. But when it comes to women, it was never easy. And when we read male survivors of Armenian genocide, we see that they are referring Raqqa camp, the Kaymakam of Raqqa, Raqqa had several Kaymakams. They would refer them with saying that they were very kind to them, and so on and so forth. But when it comes again to women survivors, you see how Armenian women were used in Raqqa. So, and this is, but before reaching Raqqa, right? So these groups of women who would be in transit camps, they were promised that now they are going to be transferred into their final destination, which, for example, in this case is Raqqa, they would be driven from one point to another for several weeks in order to starve them and to make them weak. And because of this route, they were actually attacked. Most of them were robbed from their clothes. And something is significant when it comes to Armenian women deportees. Most of them were naked. And when I'm saying most of them, I'm not exaggerating. Most of them were naked because they were robbed of their clothing in their way and in these transit camps and then concentration camps. So as with any concentration camp, many women who reach Raqqa, and this is the quote of an eyewitness, let's say, who testifies that they were driven from one place to another, and when they reach Raqqa, they were completely exhausted. But again, going back to what I said about the transit camps, infected women with no one to take care of them, they would die. So, and again, this was the case of any concentration camp you can imagine, including Raqqa. Now, Raqqa gave another opportunity for Armenian women for survival, to exchange their services for survival and for protection. This was something that was not welcomed by Armenian community in Raqqa, but it was the only way for Armenians to survive. And remember, Armenian women to survive. And this was a barter that was actually offered by perpetrator society, and it was by their terms. Okay, to exchange these women so they would become their housekeepers, their sex slaves, or their wives. They had to change their religion. They had to hide their Armenianness, but after all, that was the only way of survival. And many Armenians would do that to save them and to save their children. So this was something that became mostly the main way of survival for Armenian women and for their children. And of course, this is a quote about those who would stay in the begging in the streets, and of course they were all sent to Derzor and massacred during the second stage of genocide in 1916, late 1915, and in spring of 1916. Another concentration camp that when I was reading the testimonies of female survivors and male survivors, I've noticed that many male survivors would talk highly about the gaimagams of Rasulijn, for example. But when it comes to women, we see that most of the sexual crimes, like the rape, gang rape, and forced marriages and forced prostitution, everything that you can imagine took place in Rasulijn. And it was eyewitnessed both by perpetrators' society, and they were also shocked because we read in their testimonies as well, and also foreigners and also Armenians. So this was something that it was very typical to Rasulijn. When Armenian women reached Rasulijn, they knew that they cannot, for example, change money alone, right, for food, because they would be followed. they would be followed, they would be killed, they would be threatened. So this was something that other families who had male protectors would not face, right? So, and again, women had to find someone who would protect them, a local master who would protect them. So the same way of survival. Going back to the conditions of these camps, so this is a description of a survivor who, Sapuhi, who with her mom and two children, they reached Rasuline. And imagine that they came to settle. It's supposed to be their home for a while, but what they see just, so she describes, there was a small lake covered in frog form, smelly and full of red worms. The animals would drink the water from that lake, and the deportees did too. So this was her description of Rasuline. And as I said, rape, gang rape, abduction, brutal sexualized killings, which was Anthony Holzleich wrote a brilliant article about this, how sexualized was this killings and destruction of Armenian women's bodies. So, and he gives evidence particularly from Rasuline. So this was part of everyday life. And it was terrorizing those who would resist forced conversion, who would resist to marry to locals, or to convert, or to give up their Armenian identity. So everyone knows about Deir Zor, that it was the hell of Armenian deportees. But again, many don't know that first deportees who reached Deir Zor, they had an opportunity to get in, right? So to get into the city, which was a beautiful city, they would describe, and find a room to stay. Okay. And then when the deportees keep coming and coming, there was no enough space in the city, and they had to stay outside of the city in tent camp, which was basically, if you stay there, your chances of survival was very, very little. So some authorities would come to this camp city, which was established outside of Deir Zor city, and ask of deportees if there are some carpet makers among them, or some cooks among them, or those who can do a good broidery. So those are the ones who were welcome to come to the city. And some women were very good at it. So they would form a group and they would go, they would say, we're going to show our work. So they would be, of course, free labor, but it again gave them some protection and a daily survival. But who is going to rent a house for them? Would the locals rent a house if there is no male protection there? It was a big question. And also, I took this quote because I wanted to show that locals were also driven by hatred towards Armenians. Armenians who arrived were seen as those who are others, and do not, so they were not welcomed in those places. So they were seen as the lowest. So this quote is about it. So a woman who comes, she says, I was searching for a room to rent when I met an old man. He noticed that I was Armenian and advised me to search elsewhere. And it was noticeable if you are Armenian refugee, from your clothes, everything. This part of the city is for humans, he said, not for you. You must stay far from the city. So this was the situation again. And going back to how survive, either gold, money, or you have to provide some services in order to survive. So sexual barter became something that was the only, I would say, way of survival in their source. Because if in other concentration camps there were other ways of survival, the government also established these workshops where Armenian women and children were working for just piece of bread, but it was piece of bread and they could survive this imalatane. So, but when it comes to the resort, at some point, the only way of survival for these women who were in the tent city, outside of the city, was a sexual barter. And I refuse to call it prostitution because of the genocidal environment, and because it was an exchange for protection and for survival. And this was genocidal environment which created this dehumanization and moral decline of Armenians. And sometimes even Armenian scholars try to judge the survivors from their own perspective from nowadays, ignoring the genocidal environment. Genocidal environment has completely different moral codes, and you cannot apply pre-genocide values or moral codes into genocidal environment. So this is something is very important when it comes to sexual barter. And so again, this is an example of an Armenian girl, young Zabel, who survived sexual slavery and ended up in the resort. By the way, those who would escape or who would be abducted, they had no idea what was going on in these concentration camps, or even if they knew what was going on, they prepared to be with their community. So they would escape and come to these camps to find relatives or to find community members. So this is the story of Zabe, who would come, end up in the resort. So this girl was with another Armenian boys, orphans. There were 5 of them, who would go and try to find the food, searching tents, because many tents, many members, they were, of the community, they would die inside of tent, and nobody would notice until someone would come and check. So this Zabel was with these orphans who would go and check these tents, and then when they couldn't find the bread, she would go and sell herself and bring bread. And because of her, these 5 orphans also survived. This is very interesting because and one of these survivors actually gives the story of Zabel, saying that she was the reason that we survived. Okay, so and then again, if in the first stage of the Armenian genocide, Armenian women refused to become wives of those who would offer this option. During the second stage of the Armenian genocide, many were happy for this opportunity because of the decrease of their health, their beauty, and because they knew that they already learned that this was the only way of survival and survival of their children. And often we in Armenian literature and genocide survivors would refer to Armenian women who would sell their children in order to save them or to get some more food for their other children. So again, this was the genocidal environment, and it was the only way of survival. So when in late 1915 and in the spring of 1916, the camps were all emptied, and all the refugees, all of them were deportees, were sent to their Zor in order to massacre them. That was the moment of final solution. Again, for Armenian women, it was not easy. So those women who were driven out of their Zor, first men were killed, physically killed, and then these women had to walk again days and days and days, and then back to kill them. So this was something that was very for me very shocking when I read it, because from the first glance you would think, oh, they are not massacring women, but then you realize the plan to make them to die in that desert, and then save them at the end to massacre. So it was very interesting, and many were horrified to come across a group of women. They would be 10 or 5 groups wandering in those deserts, trying to find something to eat or to be killed. And this is a quote from a survivor who wrote that we were happy that they would finally kill us, ending our agony. I took my daughter's hand, and when our turn came, we jumped into the gorge full of newly killed bodies. When I opened my eyes, I saw an Arab who came to rob my clothes. My daughter was also alive because we fell on the corpses. I begged the Arab to kill me, but he wounded me in my arms and legs with his sword and left, taking my daughter with him, so that she survived. So this is very interesting that after everything, she could manage to survive, and she couldn't find her daughter afterwards, but she survived. So the other group that I was talking about were the women who would escape their captors, and then they would be again detained by police, and they would be distributed in the mostly Turkish villages, where they would be free labor. So women who ended up in the Turkish villages were entirely dependent on the goodwill of their masters and other locals. Some were kind and took good care of exiled women, and some were as cruel as slave masters. And I'm using here the language of survivors, forcing them to work day and night for a piece of bread. These women had already been robbed of their last belongings, raped, separated from their children, forcibly married, or moved from one place to another. So it was impossible for them, I guess, to escape after. And many were publicly killed, and there are records about this in the Jerusalem Armenian archives. There's a huge file on these women, survivors who would come and testify what happened with them in those Turkish villages. So why publicly torture and kill them? To horrify them and to force them to stay, to be submissive, and this was the main tactic. And after the war, actually, many locals who witnessed this would come and testify, saying this is what happened, and we testified that these people mistreated these women, they killed them, they raped them. So we also have testimonies of these Turkish religious who would come and tell this. During the actions, they would probably afraid to stop it, but afterwards they came and witnessed that what they saw. So exiled women's life in the eastern region of Syria was different, very different from those of the western part, and mostly Armenians survived from these eastern regions, and so these deportees were settled among the villagers, and they had compared where they came from before reaching these settlements. It also so it depended how they would survive these 3 years until 1918. So I divide them into two groups: those who were deported from Anatolia, and they arrived to these locations. They had nothing. Usually they were alone, without any belongings, and those who were deported from Adana province. And so, Adana province was deported very late, and most of them arrived to the settlements with full family members. So obviously from the very beginning, survival was not equal for these two groups. From in the beginning, these Armenians from Adana province, they would help those from Anatolia, but when days passed and they realized that their only survivor depends on what they have, according to their wealth, because every day counted, so they stopped to provide any support because, again, they couldn't. So this was another inter-community dynamic going on. Most of these women, at the end, close to 1918, became prostitutes and ended up in the Muslim households, again, here in the eastern regions of Syria, because, again, if they stayed alone, that was the only way of survival. Why? Because of the war, not only Armenian deportees, but also locals were starving. And of course, when the aid came, the locals were the ones who would get that aid. And starvation was something very real, not only for Armenian deportees, but also for locals. So, and again, remember that Armenian deportees were the lowest class among all of them. So, and this is from Manas Setrakian's memoir. I took this quote in order to show you how, what was the situation for everyone in that region because of the war and because what was happening. So exiled Armenians collected edible greens from the fields and gardens, boiled them, added salt, and eat them 2-3 times a day. 70 out of 100 Armenians ate these plants. I have met Armenians who died 10-12 hours later after eating those plants from severe stomach ache. 70 out of 100 Armenians in the city were surviving that way. Eating grass was the main alternative to begging, yet others were collecting animal carcasses, cooking and eating. Some were collecting blood next to the slaughterhouses and making blood soup. In the streets, garbage, people in the street garbage, people were looking for pieces of rotten vegetables or wheat and barley grains, so in order to survive. But again, this, if they found something, it was extraordinary in those days. So to conclude, in general, the second phase of the Armenian genocide is one of the most complex aspects due to its geography and the density of the events that took place during the period. Armenian deportees who reached Syria were mostly women and children. They had to stay in transit camps, deportation camps, and unknown cities and villages, and until the fall of 1918, had to fight for survival while enduring unbearable genocidal conditions. Their everyday existence were full of starvation, humiliation, rape, forced marriages, forced prostitution, forced labor, sexual slavery, torture, mutilation of their bodies, murders, and the abduction of their children. So I will end here, and because the topic is very hard, we can open for Q&A, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I have to make some remarks, and then we will take the questions from the audience. Yeah, okay. So thank you, Anna, for this. I don't know how to describe, I would say wonderful, but the topic is so depressive and so heavy, and but it was insightful. So thank you so very much. And this work forms part of Anna's dissertation, and we very much look forward to seeing it published. This was one of the reasons that Anna was in our program. Anna is a young and highly promising scholar in our field, working on an area that has long been neglected in genocide studies, namely gender and genocide. For decades, this topic received far less attention than it deserved. Yet we know that every genocide is gendered, actually. Mass violence is never experienced uniformly. Men are often targeted for execution, while women and children are subjected to distinct, prolonged, and deeply embodied form of destruction, rape, forced conversion, abduction, sexual slavery, coerced marriage, and assimilation. These are not incidental crimes, they are structural component of genocidal process. In the Armenian case too, the gendered nature of violence is unmistakable. The Armenian woman's body was not merely a site of assault. I think it's very important. It was not only merely a site of assault, it became a symbolic terrain upon which domination over the entire community was enacted. Violating that body was equated with subjugating the nation itself. This is a very important aspect. I mean, Anna taught me also this aspect of the genocide. Sexual violence became a performance of sovereignty, a spectacle of conquest inscribed onto the collective body of people. As many scholars have shown, these acts were not simply atrocities of opportunity. They functioned as instrument of domination directed against ethnic, religious, and cultural group, constructed as the enemy, the group imagined as other. Sexual violence served not only to violate individual bodies, but to enact the symbolic destruction of the nation itself. And future research must therefore go beyond cataloging act of assault. It must examine how practices of forced assimilation, bodily erasure, and reproductive control operated as mechanism of collective unmaking. Strategies aimed at dismantling the social and cultural continuity of the targeted group. Understanding this broader logic in which gendered violence becomes a coded performance of group destruction remains a crucial task for the next generation of scholars. Seen from this perspective, Anna's contribution becomes even more clearer. By reconstructing women's daily life in exile, tracing their experiences across different regions and conditions, she reminds us that the gender is not a secondary detail, but a fundamental analytical lens. Her research shows how women navigated extreme vulnerability, coercion, and violence, yet also at times exercised agency within narrow constraints imposed upon them. She helps us, Anna helps us understand the Armenian genocide, not only as a story of destruction, but also through the lived experiences, strategies, and survival struggle of the women themselves. So, with that, let us now open the floor for questions and discussions. Thank you again, Anna, for this really insightful lecture. Question from here? If not, then we can go on the online. If there are questions there. Yeah, I have also a couple of questions, but go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for Dr. Akcam said the insightful but difficult lecture. You mentioned judgment from scholars of genocide towards the women who participated in what you described as sexual barter. But I'm curious about their own contemporaries, like when it was all said and done and the dust settled, how were they incorporated back into the society?
Yes, thank you for this question. Not if I said if I articulate it that way, I was wrong, because scholars would avoid even to talk about this. They would not talk about it. They would avoid to mention it, which is this is what I meant. And yes, so those who were in concentration camps with these women, they knew what happened with these women. They would not be judgmental during, because they benefited from it. This is very important because they benefited from it. And for example, Gabrigan writes about it, how Manushak from Zara, Manushak from Sebastian helped their communities to survive because they became the jewels of this man's harem, who would actually bring these people into his farm to work, and this was the way of survival. Okay, and so this is very crucial. And he was not judgmental after, but they didn't also somehow support these women to come back. I'm sorry, I have to grab my. Thank you. So after 1918, those women who became so-called prostitutes, they were not welcomed. And we see it in Odian's writing as well. I mean, Odian himself used these women. He was recruiting Armenian women for German soldiers. But then he writes in his memoir how he met these two women from Banderma and asked them, so what is next? And they are like, oh, we are not coming back after leaving this shameful. This is Odian telling us, as if he was kind of deciding on behalf of them. I don't know. This is my feeling. And after the genocide, for example, Zavender Yahyayan, he witnessed a lot of women to become prostitutes. He did everything to save these women. So, but again, the communities, it depended. Some were just lost. I mean, we don't know what happened with these Manushaks after the genocide. We have no recollection of if they were saved. My guess is because I searched for them, they were not saved. And also, we have to remember that collective memory of victims is also very objective, subjective. I'm sorry, because they choose to remember what they want to remember. This is a very, it's a common thing, and they didn't want to remember these, let's say, moral decline, dehumanization. They would remember the heroic episodes of, I mean, if you read early literature on the Armenian genocide, you would see how they were praising Armenian women who would commit suicide in order to not be raped or become wives, or ignoring the fact that those who did actually was one who survived or could save their children. So this is very important. And they became prostitutes, but they brought this bread to the household for survival of others. And I think this is the moment that we remember them, what they did, which was very important. Thank you. This was a very good question. Thank you.
Other questions? If there is no other question from the
I'm just curious. You talked about all forms of exploitation and mistreatment that typically target women of certain age range. What about women who are experience of women outside of that range, who are not, desirable in the sexual industry market or in marriage?
A very good question. So mostly they were left in the road to die.
So they were less likely to make it.
Yes, and we have very dramatic memoirs of survivors who would remember actually mentioning how they left them to die. And there is a memoir of a girl who in order to survive, he became part of a bandit group. They were gypsies who would go and they would track Armenian deportees and attack them and, rob them and then sometimes kill them. So, and she writes in her memoir how she was sent to kill an old Armenian woman, a grandma, who was sitting in the side of the road and waiting someone to come to pick her up. I don't know the background story. I don't remember, but she was forced to kill her. So they were mostly killed. Yeah. Or if they were strong enough to survive, there were those who would come. For example, they were more, wise. They would come to, for example, Aleppo and try to save their grandchildren, providing some labor work if they could. But most of these women actually couldn't make it. They were not strong enough because malnutrition and not being able to properly eat for between late 1914 till 1918 and late 1918. And I should mention that many actually died after Mudros, because after Mudros,
what is Mudros? Can you tell?
when Mudros agreement, but it ended the war actually, and Armenian survivors were free. Deportees were free when but they didn't know where to go, what to do. They didn't have any means to travel until Armenian organizations or other international organizations would come to their aid. Most of them died. Like surviving till 1918 fall, they couldn't make it. They starved. They died. Thousands died, and it's crucial.
Was there starvation or like health issues? Why?
Both, but mostly starvation. They didn't have anything. I mean, if Imalat were somewhere where they were working day and night, but they were getting piece of bread. After the war, it was closed. No one was providing any aid, nothing, not even that piece of bread. So they would die. Yeah.
So if there is no other question, it's my turn. You explicit and very good explained us that the woman experienced change in different regions in Syria. So my question is, even though I think you mentioned passing, but I want you emphasize more on it, the origin of the women, where they were coming. Mm-hmm. Did it play a role in the way how they were distributed in Syria, and so their experience also?
Yes, and I mean, if I had a chance to show the map, you would see from which region they come and where they were distributed. And of course, it was crucial. I mean, but also not only from which region they came, those who were familiar to the environment. Yes, I mean, it's half of the map, but for example, people who would come from Bitlis, let's say, they didn't know about Arabs at all. Some of them never left their village. They didn't know the dialect. They had no idea about the local even plants. I mean, they would be poisoned because they thought this plant that we ate in Mush, for example. But now they didn't know the environment at all. So chances for them to survive was very low. And of course, we should remember that communities were divided and families were divided. It was very clear, like families arrived and then they were deliberately divided. The children might be sent to one location, the mother another location, the aunt another location. And throughout all these years, from 1915 to 1918, they were trying to find their relatives, because having a relative or even a community member was the key to survival. I mean, we read in the genocide memoirs, survivors' memoirs, that they were weddings in their Zor or in Rasulah. And we think, oh, how it's possible in genocidal environment? Yes, that was a necessary thing to do. Necessary for survival, to give your daughter to someone who would keep her safe. And the chances for both families to unite this, to make this happen was, that was the only way. So
thank you. Melissa, do you want to ask something? Or
yeah, but you can.
I have two more questions. So I have two questions. One is on the communication. We know from Hajik's dissertation that there was a special net of communication that they established between the camps and so on. Do you want to add anything about the woman's role? This is not in Hajik's dissertation, so this is one aspect.
Yes, I intentionally didn't cover that part because Hajik wrote about it in his book, and he wrote several articles also. But yes, women were very crucial because the rumors that they would pass from one to another were very crucial. And even after the war, to find a relative, it was only possible because of these women and because of the rumor and because of passing information. And remember, I told you about the third group that they were in the villages and also in the big cities, that they became wives or house workers in those households. They would actually gather the information and they would pass this information about the orphans who were held in those households. And it was very crucial after the genocide to rescue. For the rescue operations, it was crucial of help of these women. And also, these women were working for perpetrators. For example, we know Araksi, who was working for Zeki Pasha. She was his cook, and she knew about many things. And sometimes she was afraid. Of course, she was afraid. I mean, when they offered to poison him, she was afraid, but she knew because she listened several conversations. She knew that these people would be massacred, right? And she would pass this information. So it was very crucial, very, very crucial.
Maybe follow up on that. As you said, these networks that women created, networks of like underground, almost like underground information networks, like Berjuri Varsapyan's memoir talks about how that this woman who works at the Turkish bath hammam is like making these wives of the pashas like talk about the Armenian orphans that were abducted and brought to Istanbul, and these women, Berjuri herself, Berjuri later became one of the 3 women MPs in the Armenian parliament, that Republic of Armenia, that these women created networks to rescue these orphans from these houses, and that information was so crucial that they distracted to that Armenian woman who was actually like washing Pasha's wives in the hammam. I was going to ask a connected question. We also know from to oral history interviews I conducted, even from my own family, my great grandmother told women on the deportation roads and in camps, they were I want to say creative, innovative, and like they came up with solutions and strategies of survival that are very unique to women, and they were really very innovative. Like one thing that I know from my family is that when they had very young kids who were very thirsty, they would pee on a piece of cloth and make it evaporate, and wipe the baby's lips with that, so that like the baby doesn't die of thirst. So things like that, like unheard of, like things that they devised, they invented. My question is actually like, because you talked about different communities knowing the environment or the plants or like these everyday survival strategies. Do you know any, I'm sure there is, but like, do you have anecdotes of women from different communities teaching each other how to survive? Like, was there that kind of survival strategy that one woman devised and came up with? Like, let's say, like she found a plant that is edible, and she started teaching it to other women. Like, was there? I assume that the women were also like teaching each other some strategies of like survival.
Absolutely.
Was there?
Yes, absolutely. Because first of all, these communities, some of these communities came across to each other only in these concentration camps. Garneti Armenian women, meeting with Masheti Armenian women. They, in the very beginning, the dialect and everything was different, but at the end, like they knew how to share the knowledge that they gained. And I remember for example, because it was the desert and they didn't know, for example, people coming from Anatolia, they didn't know how to protect their eyes from the sandy wind. And then how, if they're damaged, how to cure it. And this is something that they learned from those who knew. And it's this kind of information, like passing, and also, helping, because I didn't go to the details of the womanhood, let's say, helping one another. For example, in Brussels line, they would come together to go to wash their clothes because all of them had these diseases and also leaks. So you have to wash your clothes constantly. So they didn't have this means to do that. They had to walk certain distance, and then they had, because the piece of cloth they had, that was the only piece. So half would wade in the water like naked until the others would actually guard the clothes, because sometimes the Arabs would come and rob them, take the last clothes, and so these kind of community things, or cutting hair, because many Armenian women couldn't bear to have this long hair anymore, because their body was, it was in always dehumanized. They were human skeletons, and they would, survivors would write that, before the genocide, that was my pride, my duty. But in that environment, I wanted to get rid of my hair, because that was also the way to save myself, right? And no scissors, of course, and the methods that they would use to cut with the rogue, or these kind of things are very fascinating. And again, this was the only way for these women also for survival. Or warning, for example, because in that genocidal environment, Armenian men also became accomplices. And again, not going to genocidal morality, it was also their way of survival. They would collaborate with perpetrators, or they would negotiate with Bedouins, saying, we will distribute these women to you, and so on and so forth. So this was also something that women would pass information, like saying that, be aware of this, I went through it, so they sold me, so I came back. Do not these kind of things.
If I may jump in, you just raised a very important question during your presentation. This was also an issue related to whether we should have a different moral codes, and that we cannot retrospectively judge the genocide survivors with the moral code that we have. I strongly recommend to look into this issue in more detail. This is one of the central topics in Holocaust, and especially Hannah Arendt wrote extensively on that topic. Who you are to judge, whether we are allowed to judge. This is a very crucial question. And Hannah Arendt was more or less on the side of judgment. She thought that, of course, we have to judge. So then the question is, what is the criteria of these judgments, and so on and so forth. So I only wanted to raise the issue that it is really very complicated, still very much a debated topic, the question of morality and the judgment. Okay, then my question maybe, in genocide research, if we cannot find an answer to a question in the documents, we try to rationalize, we try to find a reason behind it, why it should be or why it happened in that way. In your map, you show that the Armenians mainly who were settled on the western side of Syria, were the cities and Homs and Sham, Damascus, and then towards Lebanon. The surviving rate is higher. They survive in that area, but not in the eastern part so much. Because their door was the Auschwitz and so on. Have you ever thought about the reason? Was it any logic behind it? Or it was a total coincidence?
Well, some scholars would suggest that, first of all, local perpetrators played tremendous role. And some scholars would suggest that actually Cemal Pasha played tremendous role on their survival because it was his, they were under his protection and so on and so forth. Because why they were distributed among those settlements and
well, we can already show very clearly Cemal act on the order of Talat Pasha. So he was not acting against any deportation policies.
Yes, but I don't go to the politics of perpetrators. I stay with victims, and I know for sure because I studied this from victims' perspective. I know that perpetrators, face-to-face perpetrators, play tremendous role, either they would survive or no. It doesn't matter. Instigators of genocide, what they decide. If face-to-face perpetrator decide to save you, you will be saved. So this was a case for Armenians for 100%, and even for the Holocaust. I mean, for other genocides, right? And from victims' perspective, for example, for victims, that was a rumor, which is very funny.
Not only rumor, more than rumor.
Yes, more than rumor, and also, but the other thing that I have noticed is because people who were deported from Adana province, the distances were not that long, and they could reach these settlements with the whole families. I mean, with men and with their family members. This was not the case for others, not at all. And if we look into those from Anatolia who by chance ended up in those regions, they didn't have that high, survival rate than compared to those who came from Adana province. This is for sure. This is what I have observed from witness perspective.
I have a follow-up comment and maybe a suggestion. I think also your major contribution to the scholarship is your feminist perspective that can completely revisit and rewrite the morality question from a feminist perspective, because I'm pretty sure that if you keep saying that they did these immoral things to survive, but I think from the beginning, why some acts that are equally unethical are not considered and discussed within the paradigm of morality, but it only like women's sexuality is spoken within like them as moral decay, because I'm sure there were a lot of other immoral acts going on, but it only comes when it comes to that. That's the anti-feminist approach that you are also fighting, that you didn't spell out, but I know you do. So maybe like moving away from this morality paradigm and looking at power relations and bringing gender there from a feminist perspective might be more helpful than to discuss the sexual barter, because there is still a power, a dynamic going on there, because why do we even discussing these women's morality, this is something that happens in the patriarchal societies, that women's bodies, these women were raped. When we say that, like, when we discuss this within the paradigm of morality, we're basically kind of assuming that there's a level of agency there. There is you want to give agency to these women, I understand, but like you need to, I think, better like fine tune the power relations there. That when when you said that women were like passing down information to other women about men in their communities who were selling them, it becomes very visible that it's nothing to do with morality, it's about power relations within and outside the group.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
There were one more. You want to ask something? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask because I'm not sure. Like, why is it that women who came from Aldana had like a higher survival rate? Because my family is like from Marash province. I don't really know like what difference there was there, but I don't know the history. Like, why is their survival rate higher?
As I said, I mean the distances. It's Cilician Armenians. Their chances of survival was higher because first of all, they were deported much later, and they could manage to reach those camps or those settlements with the whole families, and Marash including Cilician Armenians. Yeah, this is why.
Thank you, Anna, for this really wonderful presentation and talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.